Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. This morning we'll be in Matthew chapter 22, verses 1 through 33. Jesus spoke to them again in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven can be compared to a king who gave a wedding banquet for his son. He sent his slaves to summon those who had been invited to the banquet, but they would not come. Again he invited other slaves, saying, 'Tell those who have been invited, look, the feast I have prepared for you is ready. My oxen and fattened cattle have been slaughtered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet.' But they were indifferent and went away, one to his farm, another to his business. The rest seized his slaves, insolently mistreated them, and killed them. The king was furious. He sent his soldiers, and they put those murderers to death and set their city on fire. Then he said to his servants, 'The wedding is ready, but the ones who had been invited were not worthy. So go into the main streets and invite everyone you find to the wedding banquet.' And those slaves went out into the streets and gathered all they found, both bad and good, and the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to see the wedding guests, he saw a man there who was not wearing wedding clothes. And he said to him, 'Friend, how did you get in here without wedding clothes?' But he had nothing to say. Then the king said to his attendants, 'Tie him up hand and foot, and throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are called, but few are chosen.' Then the Pharisees went out and planned together to entrap him with his own words. They sent to him their disciples, along with the Herodians, saying, 'Teacher, we know that you are truthful and teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. You do not court anyone's favor because you show no partiality. Tell us then, what do you think? Is it right to pay taxes to Caesar or not?' But Jesus realized their evil intentions and said, 'Hypocrites, why are you testing me? Show me the coin used for the tax.' So they brought him a denarius. Jesus said to them, 'Whose image is this, and whose inscription?' They replied, 'Caesar's.' He said to them, 'Then give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's.' Now when they heard this, they were stunned, and they left him and went away. The same day, Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to him and asked him, 'Teacher, Moses said, if a man dies without having children, his brother must marry the widow and father children for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers among us. The first one married and died, and since he had no children, he left his wife to his brother. The second did the same, and the third down to the 7th. Last of all, the woman died. In the resurrection, therefore, whose wife of the 7 will she be? For they all had married her.' Jesus answered them, 'You are deceived, because you do not know the Scriptures or the power of God. For in the resurrection, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. Now as for the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was spoken to you by God? I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living.' When the crowds heard this, they were amazed at his teaching." Yeah, so you have the parable of the wedding feast there that Jesus talks about first. His answer to the Pharisees about the tax, his answer to the Sadducees about the resurrection. And that's it for the chapter. Well, chapter goes on, but that's it for what we read. But you have, first of all, this parable of the marriage feast there. So you have the kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who arranged a marriage for his son and sent out his servants to call those who were invited to the wedding, and they were not willing to come. Yeah, a king who arranged a marriage ceremony for his son. Kind of like the father arranging the marriage of Christ to the church. Yeah. But those who were invited were unwilling. It seems strange that those invited refused an invitation to a royal wedding. This illustrates the principle that there is no logical reason God's good gifts are refused. Yeah, I mean, the lavish extravagance of a royal wedding. Who wouldn't want to come to that? The king persisted in making the invitation as attractive as possible. He really wanted those invited to come. Barclay says that when a great social event happened in the Jewish culture of that day, people were invited but without a set time. On the appropriate day, when the host was ready to receive the guests, they sent out messengers to say that all things were ready and it was time to come to the feast. So then the king in this parable had long ago sent out his invitations, but it was not till everything was prepared that the final summons was issued, and insultingly refused. All things are ready is the message of the gospel. You don't come to God's feast and prepare your own meal. He has made it ready for you. You come to receive. But they made light of it and went their ways. The reaction of those invited made no sense, but it does give an accurate description of the reaction of many to the gospel. Many made light of it, others go back to their business. He was furious and sent out his armies and destroyed those murderers. The king rightfully brought judgment upon the offenders. Not only did they reject his invitation, but they also murdered his messengers. This was a prophecy of what would happen to Jerusalem, the city whose religious leaders so strongly rejected Jesus and his gospel. As many as you find invite to the wedding. The king was determined that he would not have an empty banquet hall, so an invitation was given to all those who would hear. Those servants went out into the highways and gathered together all whom they found, both good and bad. When the first and second invitations were so dramatically rejected, the third invitation was made more broadly. All were invited, whether good or bad. In this sense, we can say that this is a parable about grace. Those who were invited, and who came, were utterly undeserving of the invitation, much less the wedding feast itself. But a man was there who did not have on a wedding garment. The man without a robe was conspicuous by his difference. He came inappropriately dressed, and the king noticed. There is debate among commentators as to if it was customary for a king or nobleman to offer his guests a garment to wear at such an occasion. There seems to have been some tradition of this among the Greeks, but no evidence of the practice in the days of Jesus. He came because he was invited, but he came only in appearance. The banquet was intended to honor the king's son, but this man meant nothing of the kind. He was willing to eat the good things set before him, but in his heart there was no love either for the king or his well-beloved son. From Spurgeon. Yeah, he didn't come to this banquet with the intent of celebrating the son's betrothal, but more just to eat the food. And I guess I've heard in the past that this garment that the attender refused to put on was a way in which we approach God. That is, that God says that we need to approach him in a certain way, whether it be from the times of the Exodus of the Levitical priesthood, who had to sanctify the temple articles via the blood of sacrifice, or if it's like Moses, who was commanded to remove his sandals because the place that he was standing on was holy ground in the incident of the burning bush. There have been points in time, and God has generally revealed himself as one who one where not all ways will work to approach him. Like King Uzziah, who thought that he could approach the altar himself and was swinging the incense censer around in the temple complex, which was unlawful for him to do, but only reserved for the priests. And so leprosy was brought on him. So we need to be very careful to also, in the way that we approach God, not to think that any old way is going to work, that all paths lead to heaven, but to be careful to listen to the way that God has laid out in how he wants to be approached. And do that. Cast him into the outer darkness. The man who did as he pleased at the wedding feast, instead of honoring the king and conforming to his expectations, suffered a terrible fate. He had, by his actions, if not in words, said, "I am a free man, and will do as I like." So the king said to the servants, "Bind him, pinion him, let him never be free again." He had made too free with holy things. He had actively insulted the king. This parable demonstrates that those indifferent to the gospel, those antagonistic against the gospel, and those unchanged by the gospel share the same fate. None of them enjoy the king's feast. For many are called, but few are chosen. This statement of Jesus in this context touches on the great working together of the choices of man and the choosing of God. Why did they not come to the wedding party? Because they refused the invitation. Why did they not come to the wedding party? But because they were called, but not chosen. Yeah. So then you have the Pharisees here who are plotting a trap for Jesus, saying, "Teacher, is it lawful or not to pay the poll tax to Caesar?" Which, if Jesus answered, "Oh, it's lawful," then he would be very unpopular among the people who didn't want to pay that tax and thought it was unjust. And then you had, "It's not lawful," landing him in the hot water of, "Oh, Caesar, this guy says it's not lawful to pay your poll tax." So, yeah, both responses would have landed him in hot water. But Jesus navigates the trap, navigates around the trap beautifully here. Yeah, if he said that the taxes should be paid, he could be accused of denying the sovereignty of God over Israel, making himself unpopular with the Jewish people. If he said that taxes should not be paid, he made himself an enemy of Rome. Barclay claims that there were 3 regular taxes. There was the ground tax, which was a 10% tax on grain production, and a 20% tax on oil and wine. There was an income tax, which was 1% of a man's income. And there was the poll tax, paid by every man from 14 to 65 years of age, and every woman from 12 to 65 years of age. This tax was a denarius a year. Whose image and inscription is this? Referring to the coin. Again, with his wise answer, Jesus showed that he was in complete control. He rebuked the wickedness and hypocrisy of the Pharisees and Herodians. "Render therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar's." Jesus affirmed that the government makes legitimate requests of us. We are responsible to God in all things, but we must be obedient to government in matters civil and national. Peter said it like this: fear God, honor the king. Every Christian has a double citizenship. He is a citizen of the country in which he happens to live. To it he owes many things. He owes the safety against lawless men, which only a settled government can give. He owes all public services. Render generally means give back, whereas the verb they had used in verse 17 was simply give. It is the verb for paying a bill or settling a debt. They owe it to him. Yeah, I wonder the word for that. Apodiomi. Yeah. To pay off, discharge what is due. Interesting. And then you have the Sadducees, who came up and said that there is no resurrection from the dead. The Sadducees were the ancient version of the modern liberal theologians. They were anti-supernaturalistic, only accepting the first 5 books of Moses as authentic and disregarding what was written in those books when it pleased them to do so. The Sadducees were not many in number, but they were wealthy, aristocratic, and the governing class. The Sadducees asked Jesus a hypothetical and ridiculous question, hoping to show that the idea of the resurrection is nonsense. Based on Deuteronomy 25, 5-10, if a married man died childless, it was his brother's responsibility to impregnate his brother's widow and then count the child as the deceased husband's descendant. The Pharisee imagined elaborate circumstances along these lines and raised the question, therefore in the resurrection, whose wife of the 7 will she be? Sadducee. Probably this was one of the stock stories they were in the habit of telling in order to cast ridicule upon the resurrection. From Spurgeon. You are mistaken, Jesus says. The Sadducees connected their thoughts to a biblical passage but did not think through the passage correctly. These highly trained men were mistaken in their basic understanding of biblical truth. They don't know the Scriptures or the power of God. Their mistake was rooted in 2 causes. First, they did not know the Scriptures, though they thought they did. Second, they did not know the power of God, being basically anti-supernaturalists. This was true of them, even though religion was their career, and they were highly trained. Yeah, it should have realized God has power over life and death, and can do what he wants. Not knowing the Scriptures. It is possible for a person to have much biblical knowledge, yet not fundamentally know the Scriptures. Paul later told Timothy to hold fast the pattern of sound words which you have heard from me. This suggests that biblical truth has a pattern to it, a pattern that can be detected by the discerning heart. It also suggests that one can lose this pattern. The Sadducees had biblical knowledge, but they did not hold fast the pattern of sound words. In the resurrection, they neither marry nor are given in marriage. First, Jesus reminded them that life in the resurrection is quite different from this life. It does not merely continue this world and its arrangements, but it is life of a completely different order. It seems that life in the resurrection that Jesus spoke of here does not include some of the pleasures of life we know on earth. It is only because the enjoyments and satisfaction of heaven far surpass what we know on earth. We can't be completely certain what life in glory beyond will be like, but we can know with certainty that no one will be disappointed with the arrangements. Yeah, we're to be united with God in heaven, and as such, we'll enjoy the pleasure of being with Him eternally. Jesus here said that the angels of God in heaven do not marry. We presume this includes that they do not have sexual relationships. Anywho, carrying on. Psalm chapter 27, verses 1 through 6. The Lord delivers and vindicates me. I fear no one. The Lord protects my life. I am afraid of no one. When evil men attack me to devour my flesh, when my adversaries and enemies attack me, they stumble and fall. Even when an army is deployed against me, I do not fear. Even when war is imminent, I remain confident. I have asked the Lord for one thing. This is what I desire. I want to live in the Lord's house all the days of my life, so I can gaze at the splendor of the Lord and contemplate in His temple. He will surely give me shelter in the day of danger. He will hide me in His home. He will place me on an inaccessible rocky summit. Now I will triumph over my enemies who surround me. I will offer sacrifices in His dwelling place and shout for joy. I will sing praises to the Lord. Fearless trust in God. It reminds me of that bit with, I think it was Elijah, where an enemy army was on him, and his servant was crying out, "Oh, we're doomed now." And he said to him, "Oh Lord," he prayed to God to open his eyes, and he saw the angelic hosts surrounding the enemy army. And yeah. With God, we don't need to fear anything. And finally, Proverbs chapter 6, verses 20 through 26. My child, guard the commands of your father, and do not forsake the instruction of your mother. Bind them on your heart continually, fasten them around your neck. When you walk about, they will guide you. When you lie down, they will watch over you. When you wake up, they will talk to you. For the commandments are like a lamp, instruction is like a light, and rebukes of discipline are like the road leading to life. By keeping you from the evil woman, from the smooth tongue of the loose woman, do not lust in your heart for her beauty, and do not let her captivate you with her alluring eyes. For on account of a prostitute, one is brought down to a loaf of bread, but the wife of another man preys on your precious life. Yeah. It's interesting. These words are meant to bring life, to keep one from doing things that will harm one's life, to encourage one in the way of keeping life. There's a real effort being portrayed here. Bind them on your heart continually. Fasten them around your neck. Don't forsake the instruction of your mother. Guard the commands of your father. That is, there is active defense of these principles being admonished by the preacher here. So I think that's important to keep in mind, and especially for, I think it's an active warning against deconstructionism. That is, that we shouldn't so frivolously squander the foundation that has been provided to us and be agents of its own destruction, because these are things that lead us into life, and we destroy them at our own harm. That is one of the consequences here that's listed is of rejecting these is falling into the hands of the evil woman. The preacher admonishes not to lust in her heart, in your heart, for her beauty. That is to reject what your heart is saying here of, oh, it's love, look, she's so beautiful. But she's the wife of another man. She's engaging in adultery. And in the case of a prostitute, it's not, well, the proverb says that on account of a prostitute, one is brought down to a loaf of bread. You're reduced to being another meal for the prostitute. But your life is precious, and it shouldn't be squandered on satisfying the lust or stomach of another. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you have a good day. Bye.